Hello. Thank you all very much for joining us today for today's session with 4 learners sharing their experiences learning their Indigenous languages. What I'd like to do is start out by having each of our members introduce themselves, and then we will launch into a series of questions which each of them will answer. To start with, I'll introduce myself. I am your moderator today. My name is Sheila Bong. I am an enrolled member of the Blackfeet Nation in actually where I grew up, Browning, Montana. And I have remained very close to my native roots through various projects that I've worked on throughout my life, and I actually serve on 2 distinct boards. I serve on the Northwest Indian Language Institute at the University of Oregon, and also 7,000 Languages. So without further ado, I would like to have each of our participants today in our roundtable introduce themselves. Thank you. We'll start with Treyace, please.
Well, okay. Hello, everybody. It's really good to see everybody's faces. Nice to meet you. My Blackfoot name is Many Stars Woman. My English name is Treyace Yellowell. I was born and raised on the Blackfeet Indian Reservation, and I been speaking our language since I was probably walking.
Thank you, Treyace. Jason.
Halito, Hachi Halito Le, sa Hochifuya Jason Lewis, Oklahoma Chata Sia, Oko Los Angeles, California, Asano Tokoko, Himo, Mississippi, Chata Iyakni, Atale, Anchoka Chafa, Oglasha Biasha Ata, Himo. Great to see y'all. I greet you in Choctaw with our traditional greeting of Halito. And I grew up in California. The Choctaw are all over the world. But about 10 years ago, I made the move to our ancestral homelands in Mississippi. And that's where I've been here. The language is still spoken here fluently in everyday environment. So it's a great honor to talk about my language here with y'all. Can't wait to hear about your all's stories.
Thank you, Jason. Keegan.
Sheikh Batwai, Kwasa Pumianawi, Inknashwaniksha, Willem Hohoch, Kushiaptumpi, Keegan Livermore, Yakima Kaniknashwa. Hello, my English name is Keegan Livermore. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a descendant of the Yakima Nation who grew up in Portland, Oregon, where my family has been for 3 generations. I work with the Yakima dialect of the Ichishkian language, which lives in what is currently Washington and Oregon. About 3 years ago, I moved back to the reservation after my undergraduate degree to begin learning our language, and have since found my way to the University of Oregon, where I'm studying language teaching in a linguistics program here. I'm super, super excited to hear about everyone's time with language and what they're hoping to do next.
Thank you, Keegan. Connor.
Chumi Sunwi, Connor Bahus Ilakatige, Isomawi Chi'i. My name is Connor. In English, my Pit River name is Pahus. From the Ilmawi band of the Pit River tribe. And I just graduated from the Language Teaching Studies program at the University of Oregon, program that Keegan's in right now. Yeah, I grew up in Sacramento, which is about 3 hours or so south of my tribal homelands. I did not grow up hearing the language, and unfortunately we don't have any fluent speakers left alive, but we do have recordings and lots of documentation. So that's what we're working with.
Thank you, Connor. So for our first question, could you share why you decided to learn your language and what your program was like? Treyace, can we start with you, please?
Okay. Well, I started school. I started fourth 4 to 5 years old, I went to our Nitsipo Watson school. So on the Blackfeet Reservation down here, we have our immersion school, Cutswood School. And it's a small little school that was established in 1995 by Dr. Daryl Kipp and Dr. Dorothy Silsmoken and Edwin Redman Littleplume. And the idea was that we were going to, the idea for the school was that they were going to take young students, preferably preschool, kindergarten age, and teach them the language. At that time, when the school was established down here in America and the States, the Amskapi Bikani Nation, the Southern Pagan, my tribe, we were really losing our language with, post-colonialism, with the eradication of everything that happened to our people. We were in a deficit. There was maybe, I think they said 30%, maybe, if that, a little more, that could speak our language fluently way back in the 90s. So it sparked a huge scare within our people, within certain community members. And Dr. Daryl Kipp, Dorothy Silsmoken, and Redman Littleplume, they were kind of like the spearheads of our school. And it grew into a school that now can take 30 students. And I went there from kindergarten to 8th grade. I had no public schooling until I went into high school. And the best way that I can describe Cutswood School was it was a really amazing place. And I really dedicate everything that I've accomplished, everything the person who I am today, I give it to Cutswood Nitsipo Watson. It was a more laid back school. Daryl Kipp didn't believe in grades, so we never got tested. And we used the language every day, every morning, from 8 to 10, from 8 to 11, it was strictly Blackfeet. And then, in the afternoon, of course, we had math and our English studies. It was a very lax school. We went 4 days a week. We got really good breakfasts. I remember when I went to high school, I was really kind of bummed because the breakfasts weren't as good as Cutswood, And in Cutswood, the idea behind it was to make it a grandma's house because when you go to grandma's house, you learn the language. When you're a grandparent's baby, when you're Gipitapuka, you have that old people knowledge. And that was the idea behind Cutswood School. They based it off of some Hawaiian immersion schools at the time as well. So our program, it is still a very successful program. We do have lots of language speakers out there now, not only myself. My younger brother is in the school. He's 13 and he's been there since he was 5, loves it. And so our program was special in a sense that cultural identity and our own personal identity was a huge thing. Our teachers encouraged us if we were artistic, if we could sing, if we had different talents or different hobbies, we were very encouraged to pursue those things and just kind of be worldly. Daryl Kipp would bring in people from all over the world, language speakers, anthropologists. We had all kinds of people come through Cutswood, and it was a very amazing experience. And I love the school I come from. I'm alumni of Cutswood now, and I'm there all the time. Not right now with COVID, of course, but pre-COVID, that's my second home, was my school. And that's really a lot of us students have those same feelings, just because it was just an amazing little teeny tiny, almost like homeschool environment, but you got to learn your language. And we learned not just our language, but we learned our culture. We learned how to sing songs. We learned how to pray. A lot of the families that send their kids to Cutswood are the more ceremony families on our reservation. So we have a lot of students that utilize the language for ceremony. We're kind of starting to puzzle piece everything back together. And I really strongly believe that Cutswood really, opened the door for our language to strive and for more people to be kind of more engaged. I know there was this time where speaking Blackfeet wasn't cool. It was very taboo. And then here's Cutswood, this little tiny immersion school of 25 students making waves. It's a very successful program. Lots of high things to say.
Thank you. I think we all wish that we could have had that kind of upbringing. It's much easier, as we all know, to learn when you are very young. Jason, could you share some information about your journey?
Sure. So the Choctaw are in a large diaspora away from our homelands. And for folks that don't know, we've kind of been twice removed. In the 1830s, there was the Indian removal that pushed us out from Mississippi into Oklahoma, and a lot of tribes had that experience. And then in the 1940s and 50s, the relocation programs that shifted folks into the urban centers, and that was how my family ended up in Los Angeles. And my whole life, it was a clear picture for me that my father had been born in Oklahoma and then brought over here to grow up, over there to grow up. And so it was very hard to get a sense of what Choctaw is, aside from being in a displaced state my whole life. The urban Indian community of Los Angeles is vast, and I was very much a part of that. And I grew up with a lot of, friends, and even my colleagues going to college and university. We all were like the urban Indians from LA, but it still was difficult to understand my Choctaw identity. And so after finishing my undergrad, I had decided I wanted to try to figure some of those things out through my academic experience. I followed the trail of where my family had been in Lawrence, Kansas. My grandfather had gone to the boarding school out there at Haskell, which is now a university for Native Americans. And so I decided to go to grad school out there and just see if I could, learn more about that part of my family's trajectory away from our homelands. And when I was there, it came clear to me that I really needed to figure out something to work on to help my own culture. And a part of my research doing, thesis was looking into oral history and stories of how people ended up leaving Oklahoma. But I also realized that the language itself is very much wanting to be alive, especially for us who are in that maybe first or second generation away from our homelands. And so I decided to make that commitment. And part of that was understanding that it's very difficult to learn language, being away from speakers. And the Oklahoma Choctaw, they have a really amazing school of Choctaw language, but it's very remote and it's very difficult to get consistency. And that's something I learned in grad school, that there has got to be a lot of time spent listening and learning from real speakers to pick up the language. And so I eventually made the decision that I was going to move to Mississippi, because the language here among the Mississippi Band of Choctaw, like I said before, is still spoken quite a bit. In fact, there's probably 50 to 60% of the 10,000 member population still speaking. Of course, when I got here, I thought, well, maybe I'll just be out here a couple of years and I'll pick up the language. 10 years later, you can't just show up someplace and expect to take, there was definitely a lot of reciprocity that I learned was needed. And I've been so fortunate because I was able to get a job working for the language program here. And in that time, been able to understand the problems that are facing a community where the language is still spoken, because I'm now witnessing grandparents having the experience of not being able to speak in their own language to their grandchildren. And to imagine the trauma of that experience, for me, I didn't realize how impactful it is every single day. And so I'm in an interesting position. I'm I guess lucky because I'm around people who do speak the language still, but I'm also seeing people facing the shame and trauma of losing their language every single day. And so my experience, I've just been very, I think, proud and honored to work on fixing some of this problem. And part of that has been I've been able to use my writing skills from my education to help get a lot of grants to bring money to the program here. We've actually been able to get the Choctaw language back into the school system because the tribe runs its very own school system, but the language has been gone for, yeah, thank you. The language has been gone for decades, and we finally got it back in. And we're focusing on the elementary school students, the youngest, so early elementary right now. Been able to help write curriculum, even been able to help develop some assessments where we've shown progress for the first time in 2 generations, the language increasing a little bit. So I'm learning the language every day in a very immersive environment, but at the same time, I'm also really contributing to trying to keep the language alive here. And, in the modern era, there's a lot of new technologies that's allowing me to connect more with like my colleagues and peers and other displaced Oklahoma Choctaws, through Facebook. There's growing pages where people are getting on there and writing and talking to each other. So it's kind of an exciting era to be a part of, to get into the language and to be able to connect with people, even on meetings like this. So I'm not fluent, but I'm getting, I'm pretty close, and I'm very excited to be, growing up. And now my daughter and my nephew who are out here, they're gonna be able to grow up with the language even more. So it's an honor to be here. I don't know if I'll ever make it back to California. There's some differences between California and Mississippi, to say the least. But I feel at home out here with my family. So thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Keegan.
So I grew up 3rd generation in Portland, about a 3-hour-ish drive from our reservations currently in Washington. My great-grandmother was born there and spoke Ichishkin as her first language, but for whatever reasons I will never be able to understand, she did not pass that language on to my grandmother and her siblings. So growing up in Portland, I sort of had a vague sense of an Indigenous identity. Growing up there, it really wasn't until I was in college, as an undergraduate, where I met kind of finally a critical mass of Indigenous students from all sorts of tribal nations all over the country and world. And that was really where the seed was first planted of like, okay, there's a lot of questions I need to start digging into. So as I was getting into literature study in the comparative literature department, that was when the language question was planted, well, reading in a first language, reading in an original language, engaging with story and culture through that lens as translation changes so much. And it was like winter 2016 was when I was starting to kind of dig into a lot of this. And that's when I stumbled across Tuchamshish, Dr. Virginia Beavert's 2009 dictionary in my university library in California. Hours from where I lived and where my reservation, stumbling across this dictionary that had been checked out 3 times since it had been acquired by that library, and thinking, okay, let's do this next. So I did some searching, found a lot of her advocacy and articles about the work that she has incredibly done throughout her career, which is still going at the age of 99. But the work that she is doing and the teachers and the classes that have spawned off of her teaching. And with that, I found the language classes taught by Tualatin, Greg Sutterlick, at Heritage University on the Yakama Nation Reservation. So that's where I jumped to in 2017. The first to move back from our sect of the family back to the reservation in 3 generations, which was a very scary experience because there's family and people and I don't know anything. And so I was finding people I could ask questions of politely and like start to like figure out kind of the seed on the ground and all the different language stuff. So really the biggest piece was being connected there at Heritage, the connections through Heritage here to the University of Oregon, where there are also Ishishkin classes offered in a community here that is burgeoning as well. So it's really been just walking in, wanting to study literature, ended up studying language and linguistics, and then realizing that there's more that I can do by learning to be an educator and share our language with people through all medium possible. As there are young people and teenagers and adults and parents and grandparents who are all wanting to do language stuff everywhere. And there are lots of different opportunities to start studying it now, kind of in this rich age that Jason was mentioning.
Thank you, Keegan. Connor.
All right. Yeah, so I guess I'll just start at the beginning. Yeah, growing up, I grew up in Sacramento, away from my tribe. And so yeah, I didn't grow up hearing the language. And then growing up, it's not really something that I heard people talk about very much. Even when I'd, go visit family in the summer and we'd stay there and, I'd learn a lot about the culture and the history and, what it means to be a Pitt River person. There wasn't, I didn't hear the language being spoken, except for one time my great aunt, my grandma's sister, just randomly like told me how to say some things in the language. And then she talked about like how her grandma taught her the language when she was young, but that she can't really speak it fluently. And then that was kind of it. That was just like that one time that I heard the language growing up. And then, yeah, it wasn't really until I was in college for my bachelor's degree. And then I had a linguistic anthropology class. And so I decided to write the final paper on Pitt River language. And so, I did a bunch of research and then I had found a linguist who did a bunch of recordings on our language with fluent speakers back in the 70s. And so I got in touch with him and got some some sources and some information from him. And so then that was kind of like the beginnings of more of my curiosity for our language. And then after college, I graduated. I moved to Reading, which is a lot closer to our tribal homelands. And I started working for an American Indian Ed Center, just like after school program and other stuff. And I wasn't quite sure if like that wasn't really like what I wanted to do for my career. And so I just didn't really know what I wanted to do. I was kind of thinking about grad school, but I didn't have anything like specific that I wanted to focus on. And I was the language was like kind of in the back of my mind, but I didn't really know like where to go with that. And I didn't know like who to learn from. Like there's nobody just around speaking the language as far as I knew. So I had no idea like what to do. Um, and then one day I get a call from one of my cousins, and he's looking for my dad because the linguist that I talked about that worked with our elders in the 70s, he was in town and staying at one of our friends' house, and like my dad had wanted to meet him. So my cousin was trying to get a hold of my dad, and he's like, "Oh, well, we're having dinner, and I know you like to eat, so you should just come over anyways." And so I was like, yeah, all right, sounds good. And then yeah, I went over there and then I was, we were having a conversation and I was just talking about like, well, I'd always thought about learning language, but I didn't know what to do and like I'm not sure what I want to do after, graduating college. And they're like, well, why don't you just go back to college for the language, go back to grad school for the language? And I was just like, oh yeah, and then it just kind of clicked. And then I there was also two other Pitt River people who were decided to become language teachers, just in their own like after school programs up on the reservation in Alturas. And so I also got connected with them. And so yeah, ever since then we've had our own little core group of people just kind of supporting each other with like different language resources. And then the linguist who he lives on the East Coast, but like whenever we ask him questions or need like, you know, any kind of data or recordings or anything, then like he sends it to us right away. So that's also helpful. And then, yeah, I learned a lot in the LTS program at the university. A lot about like language teaching specifically and curriculum development and learning materials creation and all that kind of stuff. And so now I'm back in Reading, working for a grant or as an assistant for the linguist I mentioned, Bruce Nevin. And I'm just creating learning materials right now and just looking to teach myself the language more and then hopefully kind of build up some sort of program. Yeah.
Well, thank you. It's interesting how everybody has taken a different journey. Treyace, I see, has hopped off for a moment. So I think what we'll do is I'll just ask the next question to Jason. Some of you have already touched on this, but I think one of the things that everyone is always interested in is what challenges you have experienced in trying to learn the language. Oh, Treyace, you're back on. Okay, so sorry, we saw that
No,
yeah.
oh my God.
That's okay. That's okay. No. So the question is, what were some of the challenges that you experienced learning the language, and how did you overcome them?
Well, I can't necessarily say that learning the language was challenging. I was raised by a single mother. My great-grandparent, we lived with our great-grandparents, and my grandpa Gilbert speaks Blackfeet. And like I said, ever since I can remember, I knew little words, you know, just as a little kid: eggs, milk, bread, come here, sit down. So I didn't face a challenge learning the language, but at a very young age, I remember really having a hard time being Indian, because when I was little, when I was younger, you know, there was the public school kids and there was us, and I got teased for learning the language. I got teased for speaking Blackfeet. I got teased for having long hair, you know. And so that was a struggle. That was kind of a challenge. Like there was a good year there where like I fought with my mom tooth and nail, and I said, you know, I want to go to public school. I don't want to go to Cutswood no more. And she was just persistent and was like, nope, you're staying in there. And I did. But, you know, the Blackfoot language, it is a part of the Algonquin language family. So it's a very diverse, it's a very hard, challenging language to try and learn as an adult. But if you learn it as a young child, if you learn the guttural stops, if you learn the tones, the aspirates, everything that's within our language at a very young age, it's like riding a bike. Reading and writing the language, I excelled at that just because we don't have a written language. Our language isn't written yet. There's no alphabet, there's no official alphabet, there's no official way. And so now I find myself in my early 20s and kind of in high school too, I get a lot of people asking me how to write words, or they'll send me a recording of their grandpa and grandma saying something, and, you know, I'll write it out for them. But yeah, there was no struggle, there was no challenge. And I really have to say I didn't struggle learning the language just because I had my grandpa at home. I had somebody that I can come home and talk to, somebody that could maybe, you know, help me, give me a few pointers. But yeah, the only challenge that I faced growing up and being a language speaker was being teased for being Indian, for being too native. I don't know. It was a different time. I blame colonization. But yeah, no, it's the Blackfoot language is truly challenging, but once you get the hang of it, it's like pie. It's easy.
Well, thank you. Thank you. So now it'll be interesting to hear from some of our other participants who started at a later time in their lives in terms of what their challenges were. Jason.
Well, it logistically it was hard to get around speakers. I'd say getting from California to Mississippi, and that was a pretty big hump to make the decision to go over. And then arriving in Mississippi, culture is different, definitely. I moved onto a reservation from a large city, and so that in itself has had its own experiential challenges. And then, as a learner, I am not accepting the age the age thing. I know theoretically, as far as acquisition theory goes, why I have certain challenges at my age in being an older learner, and there's so many of us that are displaced from our speakers. That's something maybe is a barrier for a lot of folks for even taking the first step. So in that way, I try to be a role model for older learners. But then when it comes to actually speaking to speakers, fluent speakers of indigenous languages are not used to hearing their language with a learner accent. And so getting people to have the patience to be, to be willing to hear their language all mingled up is one of the things that I probably have the biggest barriers with now. Is convincing people to want to listen to me and then respond back in Choctaw. And of course, it's a bilingual community here, so it's so easier for them to respond back in English. So that's ended up being probably the biggest barrier that I face right now, is letting speakers be patient with my accent.
Thank you, Jason. Keegan, how about you? What challenges have you experienced?
Yeah, I think, I mean, similar to Jason, I had the privilege to be able to move just myself to my reservation. I didn't have people attached to me. So I was like, oh, I'm early 20s. I'm just going to move here so I can start this. Like, that is a privilege that I know a lot of people don't have. So that spatial need was very important. I think the biggest challenge, though, especially with Ichishkin and kind of where we are now, is that it's not used like socially or commonly right now. A lot of people know maybe a greeting, maybe how to basic like self-introduction, but in terms of having a conversation or kind of forcing yourself to produce language, that's not as common right now in our language community, at least on the reservation. So a big piece of it for me, as I was beginning to learn and figure out like, okay, how can I be using this more? Where can I be using this? Was honestly shifting to digital and text-based communication, which required, unfortunately, that I make a phone keyboard so I could type in Ichishkin on my phone from scratch. It was not great. It worked out. I've been using it for 2.5 years. It's amazing. But since that keyboard 2.5 years ago, I've been able to text and Facebook and Instagram and tweet and email with my colleagues here at the UO when I lived in Washington, back home, back on the reservation with people, and communicate in that way. The biggest piece was just making it so common and so normal and so everyday, where people stopped batting an eye at it, where now all of my emails and all of my text messages start with Sheikh Maitski, or just a little bit of language, even for those who aren't learning to speak it, just so it's people are like, oh, okay, yeah, it's Keegan. This is how he greets people because that's how his language greets people. That I think has been one of the biggest pieces of just forcing it into my life in every part has it, because I know that it just takes more exposure for language learners and the people that I have around my life, just to kind of realize the effort that's going into this and being willing to meet that where I'm at.
Thank you, Keegan. Connor.
Yeah, so the biggest challenge I think I kind of mentioned already is not having fluent speakers. So yeah, I think the last fluent speakers passed on in the early or mid 2000s. So yeah, unfortunately, I don't think there was much as far as language revitalization efforts happening back then. And I was still a kid, so if I could go back in time and like have my young self all of a sudden like know who to ask about language, then that would be awesome. But yeah, as of right now, I mean, we have a lot of recordings of our elders from back in the 70s. So the good thing is like we can, hear how fluent speakers pronounce all the words. And then we have a lot of like written documentation going all the way back to like the 1920s or even like 1890s a little bit. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff we can look at. And as I said, there's one linguist who's kind of dedicated his life to helping us out. So he's a good resource for like grammatical type of stuff, and linguistic stuff, morphological analysis type stuff. So yeah, not really having people to speak with, that's really difficult. So kind of like having to talk to myself a lot, or trying to get more people interested in learning. I think the community is starting to come around a bit, because as I'm sure you guys know, there's a lot of historical trauma tied in with the language. And it's kind of like what Jason was mentioning. People don't like to hear the language not being pronounced the way their elders pronounced it. And so, like some of our elders, they grew up hearing the language. They didn't really learn how to speak it, but they can recognize it. Like they can, if you talk to them, they know what you're saying, but they can't really respond like in full sentences. But there have been times where there were language classes and there'd be like some elder sitting in the back and saying, well, that's not how, my grandma said it, or you're saying it the wrong way. But then they don't offer their way. So then it's kind of like, well, are we just not going to do it then? So, me and the couple other language teachers, like our kind of group, we've just decided, we have to do something. So I think that's been another challenge, is getting more of the community to realize like it's either something or nothing, so we have to do, what we can. And, there's other examples of languages who've had no speakers at all for an even longer amount of time, and they've been able to, recreate speakers. So that gives me a lot of hope. I think it's just a matter of kind of like what Keegan said, forcing the language into my life, just finding ways of using it, even if it's just with myself, or my dad just had surgery, just on his ankle. He'll be all right. But so I'm staying at his house. And so just like trying to get him to speak it with me, and like, he'll always forget, like we posted a bunch of stuff up in the kitchen. So like whenever we go in there, try to speak Pit River, like while we're like making food or something. But he'll forget and he'll just start speaking in English. And then I'll be like, hey, like, and start like talking to him in Pit River. And then he'd be like, oh yeah, huh, okay. And then, yeah, so I think just having to like force myself to stay on it, because it's so easy to go back to English when everything's in English all the time.
Thank you. That's the perfect segue, because that was what I was interested in asking everyone. What advice or words of encouragement do you have for those who are interested in learning their own Indigenous languages? Treyace, we'll start with you.
Well, so the first thing that I want to convey to all of our listeners is how important it is to have your cultural identity, how important it is to have your language. It's a connection between you and your ancestors. It's a connection between you and your grandparents, your mothers, your sisters, your brothers, your people. And the one reason why I started speaking the language and I wanted to learn the language was at a very young age, I seen that only my grandpa and my grandpa's friends could speak. no, not my mother, not her mother. You know, this is my great grandpa. He's 85 now. And at a very young age, I just seen how I heard and I knew how beautiful our language was, but then I also seen that my community, my people were losing who they were, you know, and like, you know, a couple of us brought up historical trauma, post-colonization, this neo-colonial state that Indigenous people are in right now. And it doesn't matter if it's in the US, Canada, you know, all over the world. When your culture, when your people, when your ancestors are eradicated, it causes hurt, it causes trauma. And the one thing that I learned growing up and having my language is that I mended some trauma within my family. I'm a 7th generation Blackfoot speaker. I'm 22 years old. You know, I'm very blessed to have a Blackfoot name. I'm very blessed to have my culture within my life. You know, I see my peers, I see even my classmates, my high school classmates. People ask them, "Oh, well, you're Blackfeet. Well, can you speak? Well, you got an Indian name, you know." And I see the hurt in my peers' eyes, or I see that there was something missing in them when they have to reply, "Well, no, I don't know my language, you know, it's dying. No, I don't have a Blackfoot name, you know, but I have an English name." And so I just want future generations, Indigenous students all over the world, young or old, learn your language, learn your people's tongue. You know, it's a blessing to be able to walk up to our chief or old person and be able to say, you go, "Okay, Tanitapi," you know. And I know it makes that old man feel good. It makes my grandpa feel good when I speak to him. You know, my mama Joyce, just like Connor was saying with his dad, when I stayed with my my adopted mother, my Blackfoot way adopted mother, we spoke all in Blackfeet all day long. And it was really crazy because we would have guests over and we would just be talking Blackfeet, and then our guests would just have to sit there kind of in silence. So that's really fun too. Hey, there's a fun side to having your language. You know, it's not, we got to stop looking at it as saving a language, and more looking at it as saving ourselves as Native people. You know, we had a culture, and it's here to stay. And the only way we're going to get these cultures to stay, the only way we're going to keep our people's livelihood here on this earth, is to learn your language. It doesn't matter if you have recordings. It doesn't matter if you have a elder. It doesn't matter if you have these little to none or just all the resources in the world. Utilize them. You know, there's, I think, a 5th edition, maybe higher, of our Blackfoot language. And I always like to encourage new and up and coming language learners to get that. You know, our people came out with downloaded apps. We have 3 or 4 Blackfoot language apps, all from each confederacy. I know we made one down here, Skapipikani, the Siksika Nation did, Apatsotpikani, you know, the Gainai Nation. We have language apps that are really cool. I thought it was like the neatest thing that we had a language app, and it's on Apple, Apple, Android. But yeah, just learn your language. It doesn't matter if it's hard. It's going to be hard. You might get teased for it. People might look down on you for it, but it's not about other people. It's about yourself. It's about filling a void that our ancestors had to go through. We're mending the broken pieces from 1800 to now. You know, I just want to say that our people have been here for thousands of years, and it's only been 150 to 200 that we have been colonized. So, you know, that's not a lot. It is a long time, but it's not a lot of loss if you look at it. We still have our grandparents. Utilize them. Go without your community, and you know what? Just ram it down people's throats. I do. I tell everybody to learn Blackfeet. You know, my little brother, I have a 3-year-old niece, and she asks me, you know, "Auntie, well, how do you say cow?" Abutskina. I tell her Napi stories. You know, she's 3 years old and she's already bilingual. and I just think it's the coolest thing. My niece, she's Blackfoot and Navajo, so I kind of am hoping that she'll be trilingual and learn Navajo. I think that would be super cool. But right now, she's all about learning Blackfeet. I know it really makes her feel good as a little tiny girl. Like she'll play in Blackfeet. She'll use Blackfoot words while she's playing, and I think it's the most beautiful thing to learn your language. It's the most beautiful thing to be Indigenous. It's the greatest, I think, the greatest thing in the world to be Indigenous. I wouldn't want to be anybody else. You know, when people outside of the community, when I'm doing my interpretive talks, when I'm doing things like this, and people ask, well, where are you from? I proudly say I'm from Browning, Montana. I'm Skapi Pikani. I was born and raised on our reservation, and I speak our language. And the reason why I love to tell people that is because, and this might be a little hateful of me, but it's a backhand to the US government. For me, being 22 years old, 2020, the year 2020, and I still speak a language that was supposed to be dismantled 100 years ago, really says something about the resilience of Native people. So yeah, learn your language. It's resiliency. It's love. It'll open so many doors in your life. I know, just being a speaker, I don't even have a degree technically underneath my belt yet, and I'm still doing things. I still get to interpret for our people. I'm still an ambassador, and just advocate for Native rights, advocate for your Indigenous self. It's our only gift in this world, and we need to keep it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Treyace. Jason.
Well, for all of us who are learning our languages, I know we stand right there with Treyace and all of those, ways of seeing and understanding the world in a different way. And so, there's not a lot more to say. The only thing I can think of is that as someone who's been a little bit disconnected, it's such a powerful thing to be able to contribute to our culture in a way. And this is what I always try to talk with people about. Like, our language is modern and it's alive, and we are going to keep it that way so that it can be fun and deep and intelligent, and that creativity can come from it, and that we can further connect ourselves, even though we are in a lot of ways displaced from our culture or from our lands. And so it's one of the things that you can actually do from a distance, although not very easily, if you have the chance to work on your Indigenous language. And I would say this for even people of the globe: you have an Indigenous language, even if you're an immigrant here to the United States. And so, to people of the globe, to find your language and to keep it alive, wherever you're in a diaspora away from your homeland, it's very powerful for you, and it's very important for your personal history. So I hope that more people can find power through their language the way we have.
Thank you, Jason. Keegan.
I think my advice focuses on or wants to focus on learning with a community and finding community through language, in that there's so much you can do on your own, and you will need to do a lot on your own if you are learning an Indigenous language, because it is oftentimes really freaking hard, and I don't want to diminish that. However, being able to connect with people through this, connect with other learners who are going through the same struggles you are, with the same types of sounds and the same types of words and the same types of pragmatic mistakes that we as learners make on a daily basis when our elders listen to what we are saying. There is community in that, and that is so affirming, both as giving you motivation to keep going because you're learning with and for people, but also remembering that you're learning for the people after you, because you will be able to share that language with them in a way that you may not have had yourself. And also allowing speaking the language and hearing the language to really make your heart happy as well, and being able to just like accept that and to hear that, because it speaks at such a more deep level than I think people realize, because it's like, oh, it's language, it's the words I use. It's like, but like, I'm describing all these things, but being able to relish in that and to celebrate the steps that you are taking as a language learner of a language that may not have a lot of speakers right now, but will have more speakers on the way, I think is one of the most motivating things I've ever encountered in this life. As I think about the work I do and the people that I'm working with and the people I love and all of that. So it's for you, but it's also not just for you. And I think that that is a powerful thing to remember with our communities.
Thank you, Keegan. Connor, what advice do you have?
Yeah, man, all you guys touched on some great stuff. So now I have to follow you. Yeah, well, I think a language is kind of a connection to a lot of different things, like obviously culture, your worldview, because the way, like every single language organizes the way you express things completely differently. I think it's also a connection to the land that your people are from, because you have your own place names for everything, you have your own names for animals, and then that's where your people live for thousands of years. So the way that your language has taken shape has grown from that. So when you go back to your homelands and when you learn the language, you start to recognize things that maybe you didn't recognize before. So I think that's also a huge part of it. Definitely, yeah, your community as well. Just because when you see people who are starting to take an interest in the language, even if they only know a couple words, and you like say a couple words and it's like, oh, cool. And like other people look at you like, whoa, what are they even saying? And it's like your own inside little like connection. Yeah. And then like, of course, the funnest part about learning any language is learning all the dirty words. So, have fun with it. Don't forget to just keeping it real, So,
I have to say, I never learned dirty words, and I refuse to learn how to cuss in blackface.
So you don't have any of those cousins that say, bad stuff?
No, I have cousins that ask me how to say bad stuff, and I just tell them to go ask somebody else. I don't want to hear it. No, no, no.
It's all part of the language. It's all all important. But I mean, my point is, have fun with it. So yeah, that's another part of the advice that I have. But also, yeah, looking to the future, um, I mean, going back to like the language being dismantled or people trying to exterminate it, stamp it out, it took over 100 years to get to where it is now. And so, I think if it took 100 years to get to where it is now, then it might take 100 years to get back to where it was before. So you're doing it for the future generations. And I think that's something that a lot of Indigenous people think about when they do stuff, is how it affects our future generations. You look ahead in time. So that's also an important thing to remember. And so with that, like, be patient. Like, don't expect everyone to just all of a sudden become fluent in a couple months. Like, it doesn't work that way. So yeah, I think patience is really key.
Well, I want to thank all of you for your time today. I think languages are one of the greatest emblems of human diversity, and languages die because people stop speaking them. So I just want to thank each and every one of you for keeping your languages alive. And it's been truly an honor to have you with us here today. And if you have anything else that you would like to say before we close out, please let me know.
Are we still doing the favorite word? Oh, the favorite word thing?
Oh, yes, please. A favorite phrase or word that you'd like to share, please do.
Okay, wait, I gotta think about it.
Okay, does anybody have one? Jason?
Well, I mean, I've got a few favorites that I can't say live. Maybe Connor and I can talk about them afterwards. Our elders say that there's no bad languages in Choctaw. However, the word for turkey in our language sounds a lot like something you would never say live. So we've got some shame to get through. Anyways, but my favorite phrase that I can say to everybody, "Hachi no tanlishke," and that means for, let there be peace for all of you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Okay, I have two favorite words. I guess when I like to talk about our language, I always like to emphasize how unique and how easy it is to say something totally different. So one example I'm gonna give you is umkena is like an old man, and umkena is a mountain goat. So it's that's like my favorite like thing to tell people. But my favorite word to say is because I get to use those strong gutturals, and it's just a greeting, and then I guess, and my very favorite thing that I ever learned in Blackfeet was kita matsin, and it's how we say goodbye, and it literally means I will see you again, because in our language there's no ever goodbyes, it's always I will see you again.
Okay, that's funny you say that, because I was gonna say the same thing. For our language, we don't have a word for goodbye. You either just say like I'm going, or if you say mihinim macho, it just means like until we see each other again.
Keegan, did you have any?
Yeah, the phrase that comes to mind is just one that we've been saying a lot in the recent past, as the world is crazy and people are doing what they need to do and all of that. And so a lot of my my video calls and my phone calls and my emails have ended with "Shich pam pima naknuita," which is please take care of yourself, which is very impactful for a lot of us right now as we deal with how to interact with people and just wanting people to make sure that they are well. So that stands out from recent memory.
Well, I thank you all. I think all of those words are perfect, and it's an excellent way to end our discussion today. Until we meet again, and peace be with you, and please take care. Thank you all very, very much for joining us.